Matt Lutcavage is the Chief Human Resources Officer of Total Wine and More, overseeing the people strategy for the largest independent retailer of wine, beer, and spirits in North America. He got there through more than 3 decades in grocery retail, including 17 years at Weis Markets, senior HR roles across Ahold Delhaize, and serving as Chief Human Resources Officer of the giant company. But the story that sets up everything Matt believes about leadership happened when he was 12 years old, standing in front of his father's car with a wire brush and a bad idea. What his father did that day, instead of what anyone would have expected, taught Matt a lesson about psychological safety that he's carried into every organization he served. He also talks about a high school supermarket manager that was decades ahead of his time with a leadership development program for teenagers, and the mistakes he made when he tried to replicate what he learned about empowerment without understanding what was beneath it. All right, Matt. Well, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I always like to get started before professional life, since that's what's going to inform who you become as a professional. So can you tell me a little bit about how you grew up, and maybe after that, how you think that's informed how you show up as a leader today?
Yeah. So I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania. I was the middle son in a middle class family. My father was an anesthetist. My mother was an RN. She, while we were young, gave up her job to stay home and raise us until our early teenage years. She then went back to work. So she was working until we went through, again, to help offset some of the college tuition and expenses. Um, Again, growing up a middle child, fell into this typical stereotypical middle child, Marsha, look
That's
at
where I
me.
fall as well.
I believe that's probably why I'm in HR today is, this need to connect and to have influence. And that has influenced, I think, my career journey. When you look at, number of personality profiles that get done on me, I turn out very green. If you look at the insights discovery, right, this need to create harmony, balance, right, to bring people together. And I think that's very fitting, especially in the space of human resources. And so that, I think those influences and being the middle child has kind of propelled me into this kind of business. It's certainly a people facing role nonetheless.
This is it. It was curious. So I'm a middle child as well. Um, and I've always been told that, the stereotype is that the middle child is sort of the mediator, making peace. Whether that's true or not, I think my siblings might beg to disagree. But has that shown up for you at all in your professional life?
Without a doubt, in
Yeah.
personal. I mean, I that was
Mhm.
true growing up in my family. My older brother's 2 years older. My younger brother's 5 years younger. I was that bridge to kind of span to those differences. I craved there to be balance and harmony at home, and I do think that there's a preference for me to create that kind of harmony at work too. Which, by the way, could be a derailer for me is, one thing is you think about our roles, especially when you get to the executive level, is to allow the debate to happen, right? To not take a debate personally, but to let it come through to some finality to some degree, because that's how people process. And if you work
Mhm.
people to try to get to consensus too quickly, you may lose a healthy part of the debate that otherwise you wouldn't hear.
Yeah, and it probably shows up in execution later because people can verbally agree, but behaviorally, it's very something different.
Exactly.
So, as you think about individuals as an early life or early career, are there some that you feel most shaped you, how you think about leadership and responsibility and accountability?
Yeah, it's hard not to mention parents when you hear a question like that, and certainly both parents played a different part in my formative years and certainly the person I've become. But think back at inflection points in my career or inflection points in my life, there's one with my father that stands out as particularly meaningful, and it's in the space of psychological safety. And to give you context, my father was 6'4", big burly beard. He looked like a lumberjack, and the man was physically imposing. And so, as a young kid, when dad was upset, you didn't mess around, right? You towed the line. And so there's a while I love my father, there was a fear that existed just because of his his physical presence. And I was probably 12, 13 years old, and I accidentally spray painted the back of my father's car. And instead of going and talking to him, I looked around, I saw there was a wire brush on his workbench because I saw him use that wire brush to get paint off trim. I figured, well, it worked on trim, it's going to work on the car. I don't want you to lose. Ben, I'm actually smarter than I may appear, I promise you. And I grabbed the wire brush off the workbench and I just so slightly started rubbing it in the back of the car. And it was working. It was getting the black paint off. It worked so well, I saw silver and realized I probably went a bit too far. It was at that point I finally worked up the courage to go find my father. And again, I remember my father was earlier in the day. He actually ironically had set me up early in the day to spray paint a science fair project. So he put the spray paint in my hand. It's his fault, right? I was just curious what other things could adhere to. He turned the corner and he saw what I had done. I saw of the face that was visible above his beard, a version of red I don't think I'd ever seen before, right? Angry, his fist was clenched. I thought, I'm not gonna live to see 14. Like I'm a goner. And instead of yelling, he looked at me and he said, "I'm sorry." And I'm thinking, is it a trick? Like, is this because he thinks I'm faster and he wants to grab me before I run too far?
Right.
And he said, "I'm sorry." And I saw his whole posture just release. And he went on to explain. He said, "Why didn't you come get me when you made the mistake?"
Mm.
What do you mean? Why didn't you just come get me? He grabbed the gasoline, he on a rag, he quickly got whatever remained of the black paint off. He said, "This could have been an easy fix had you come and got my help." And he said, "You didn't come get me." He goes, "And I think I'm to blame." He said, "I need you and I to understand now, moving forward, that I am your father and I'm always here to help you." He said, "But don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying there aren't consequences to your action, because there are and there will be." He said, "But don't let the consequences offset your desire to ask me for help. And I need to do a better job of creating space for you to know you'd come talk to me." And by the way, it was I'm actually tearing up as I think about it.
Yeah.
That for him to have the wherewithal at that point, in a moment where his car was just scratched because I was trying to get the paint off the back,
Mhm.
to say to me, "I'm at fault." Well, we're both at fault, but I'm at fault for not creating space. He was talking about psychological safety back in the 80s, right? The term that wasn't even necessarily fashionable at the time, but he had the wherewithal to figure that out, and that has stuck with me for my entire career, is this notion of, "Don't be so scared of me that you're not gonna tell me when you make a mistake. Know that there's consequences, but know that the consequences are far less severe if you ask for my help."
There's so many things about that that kind of strike me. The first is that in the moment he recognized, because he probably sensed the fear that you were radiating, right?
I know.
That
Helped that I was
that
calming
was
down.
the okay. It wasn't subtle, is what you're telling me. Yeah. So he recognized that that fear in itself created the whole conditions for this to happen. The other thing is, I think so much about how, and particularly in professional life, I think it happens less in personal life, but in professional life, you hear this like, "Don't come to me with problems, I come to me with solutions," right?
Mhm.
And that was sort of the opposite. I mean, come to me so we can work this through together. And so it's very kind of countercultural, I think, in terms of some of the messaging we get about when there's a dilemma or there's bad news or there's something we need to figure it out and have it all handled before we come back. So I really appreciate that. Um, and I'm leading because I wasn't expecting your father. I know that there are others in your life too, but maybe we'll talk about that later. That have come up and have helped to shape you. Um,
Well, I was gonna give you one
one
more if you have a moment.
Oh, please, please. Yeah.
So I actually have 2 more, right? And one
Okay.
that has just popped back into my mind recently, and again, I'm not proud of the story, but I think it talks about how it's shaped part of how I've thought about my career, and that is a band teacher. His name was Mr. Bauer, Jack Bauer. He had been my band teacher since when I first started learning to play the trumpet, which is what my instrument was, all the way through to my early part of high school. And I was I was a pretty good trumpet player. I was first trumpet, got solos, right? I was doing all these things. I was in the pep band, I was in the marching band, the concert band, I did private lessons.
I
So
hope
I
you were in
felt
jazz club.
I was in the jazz band. Yeah,
Okay, good, good. Good.
absolutely. And so I was all in on the trumpet. And it was, I think the 8th grade, I remember getting a 92 in band, right? And that then A was 90 to 100. I got a 92. I was okay until I realized that one of my other fellow trumpet players got a 96. His name was Brent.
Yeah.
I saw his report card. He was a second trumpet, not a first trumpet. He got a 96. And then I lost it. I stormed down to Mr. Bauer's office, and I'm like, "Mr. Bauer, I have a question for you." He goes, "Sure, Matt. What's going on?" I said, "You gave me a 92. By the way, as I think about how crazy he gave me an A, and I'm complaining. And I said, "You gave me a 92. This is unacceptable. It's hurting my GPA. I found out you gave Brent a 96." And he was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." He said, "I'm going to stop you for a second. First of all, your grade is about you, not about the other person. What that other person is and how they earn their grade is between me and that person. But since you're going to go there, Matt, let me tell you about you." He said, "Yes, you do all these things." He said, "But Matt, when's the last time you took your trumpet home to practice beyond these things? Uh, Matt, when's the last time that you brought in new music because you were going to challenge yourself to be better beyond what I was giving you?" He said, "It's been a while." He said, "Matt, you're good, but you can be better. And your score is reflective of the amount of effort that you're putting in at the moment and what you're capable of doing. So don't misunderstand me. In fact, if you choose not to continue to do those things, your grade will continue to go down." And again, I wasn't a very mature person, and I, at that point, said, "Well, then I'm gonna stop doing some of these extracurriculars because it got me nowhere." He goes, "Matt, I was hoping you were doing those extracurriculars because you enjoyed it, not because of what your reward was going to be. The reward should have been the participation itself. That's your choice." And I did. I quit the jazz band. I quit the pep band. I pulled myself out of these things out of spite, only later on to realize that the only person I ended up hurting in that process was me. And the fact that I failed to recognize that performance is individualized. And when you start to try to compare yourselves with others, you will always be in a losing proposition, right? The most important person to gauge yourself in performance is yourself.
How old were you when you realized when you had that insight?
I was in college when I realized it. I
Okay.
actually I actually, went and saw him and apologized later
Mm.
and shared with him my insight. And he was incredibly proud of the fact that I got there. A little disappointed
Mhm.
it took me so long to get there, but happy that I finally came to that realization.
Matt's people never get there.
Yeah,
So that's not that long.
that's true.
So there's a third individual you mentioned that you're gonna chat about.
The 3rd individual may be impact the most impactful, not only in my
Mhm.
early years, but even to this day. Very rare can you ever make the statement that the person that hires you for your first job in high school becomes your lifelong mentor, and that is the case for me. And so there's an individual in my life by the name of Jim Kessler. Jim was an assistant manager at the local supermarket when it was before I turned 16, and hired me. And that experience, probably more than anything else, has set me up for my entire professional career. In the fact that he was the kind of leader, and imagine being a 15, 16-year-old kid who has a leader that says, I want to see your report cards, because if your grades go
Really?
down, I'm gonna cut your hours because I'm not gonna let you sacrifice school for a job." Right? He was the kind of leader that had built incentives for people to grow, as a part-time student. What he did is he created, and the timing was, the mid to late '80s, and so the labor market was a bit tighter, harder to get full-time people in place. So he used a large amount of high school students to work, replenish the shelves, take care of the customers. He just did a lot of it later in the day. And so he created a system called floor leader and zone leader and floor leader. And zones, He broke the store into 3 zones, and it was usually 4 or 5 people per zone, and then he had 1 or 2 high school students run the entire crew. So he built a leadership model for high school students, and this is back in the 80s. And the incentive was the better you did, the higher in the list you went. And if you were the creme de la creme, you could become a floor leader and run the entire thing. He was teaching leadership principles to high school students, right? And revolutionary. And by the way, the store was amazing. He won store of the year. He was heralded. He actually got promoted into human resources because of the
Oh,
work that he
really?
did in the store. Oh yeah, it was
Okay.
transformational. And he was the kind of leader that connected with people. He knew that again, you would talk about concepts like situational leadership. He was
Mhm.
doing things. He knew how to interact with people where they needed to be met and how they needed to be spoken to in order to accomplish a goal. And he
Did you
taught us those
recognize that was
things.
happening at the time?
No,
Okay.
no. I mean, I knew that I was incentivized to want to grow and move up on the list.
Mhm.
I knew that there were, and by the way, it was maybe you got a 5 cent increase when you became a zone leader,
Right.
right? Or another 5 cents when you became a floor leader. But it was, but he recognized in some of us that we were competitive, and the best way to start that is that. And by the way, it was more than just if you were a good worker, was how were you able to inspire your teammates to equally achieve. And that's how. And he would tell us that, like, hey, listen, it's not just about you. Can you get your entire team to get done? How do you make sure everyone's partnering with each other to get that your particular area done? We didn't understand what he was doing, but we knew how it felt. We knew how it felt to win as a group and win as a team, and that only inspired us to wanna replicate that when he wasn't there.
That's it's pretty incredible that someone was able to do that, one, with folks that were so young that are almost like pre-professional career, right?
Yes.
Uh, and it's a perfect segue that he went into HR. Uh, I've made it my point not to pontificate on these discussions, but some of the greatest HR leaders I've seen are people that start off on the retail side, that are people who start off in store operations, right? And then they move into HR later. And I'm sometimes now starting to see people who come up through HR and then move into operations. So you see it both ways. But you started out in operations as well. And I'm curious, were there things that you saw or understood about the business at that time that you feel HR professionals were missing when you were in store ops?
Yeah, I think as I reflect on it, I can pick up on maybe what was missing then. I don't think I did in the moment. Because I think in my early career, I saw HR as transactional in the sense of, are they supplying talent? Are they supplying, the different developmental programs? Right, which by the way is an aspect of what HR does. But what I've come to realize later is successful HR, and by the way, I had great partners when I was an operator, but successful HR does more, right? They're thought partners. They talk about how to leverage and get the most out of the human capital, right? It goes back to what I learned as a high school student. Like, how do you inspire people to want to do more, right? Not just tell them, not just, but how do you build that confidence? How do you think strategically about how you maneuver and you balance teams? I think that's a function of HR that sometimes gets overlooked. This notion of just build the best team you can doesn't necessarily work. It's how people work with each other that actually builds great teams. And I think that's a
Absolutely.
notion I didn't realize until once I was in HR and saw that come to evolution.
No, I appreciate you pointing that out. It's funny how these insights come when they come, right? Sometimes they're in the moment, and but more often you have to kind of have the benefit of subsequent experience, sometimes even in different functions, to see it. Was there anything that you believed early in your career about people, performance, or leadership that you realized later was incomplete?
If I understand the question, maybe a preconceived idea that has since changed. Is that a fair way
Yeah.
of thinking of it?
Yeah. That's
I
another,
I
yeah,
I would
absolutely.
say that maybe similar to the comment I just made. I used to believe that a successful leader was successful because they surrounded themselves with the best people possible. That that by doing so, they would be more direct and candid. They would push the leader to be better, right? They would create an environment that allows innovation to occur. I think what I've come to learn is that's partly true. What I now know is more truth is it takes the leader to still create that environment to allow that to come to fruition. And so I may surround myself with the most talented, innovative individuals, but then if I can't prove in my actions that it's safe for them to be provocative, they're not going to be. If I can't prove in my action that I'm going to allow them the opportunity to be empowered and take chances and reward them even when they fail, they're not going to. And so all the talent in the world doesn't matter unless that leader responds the appropriate way to continue that behavior. That's to me was the unlock.
Have you can you think of examples either in your own leadership or folks that have led you that maybe you've reported to or been responsible for providing service to that have kind of modeled that like in the moment
Modeled
where it either gave yeah.
modeled that behavior is the same individual I mentioned as the
Okay.
person that hired me when I was 15, became
Uh-huh.
my boss again later in my career because he went on into
Really?
HR. He then ended
Okay.
up becoming the director of HR for the entire company. I became an HR manager that reported to him. And so, and part of that, it was I had to see him operate at an enterprise level versus a store level, and he had gone to store manager, and he'd grown through the company as well. But to come back again with him, and he modeled that same behavior and put it into a professional environment, right? He created systems where, he had subject matter expertise within the HR department and empowered them to do that job and allowed them to fail, coached to the right behavior or the right outcome, but never minimized them, never belittled them for what they didn't or didn't know or failed to do, and encouraged them to be successful. But equally, I would also say I could see where there are examples where that person, despite all the coaching he would do if they couldn't perform, he was also not afraid to manage performance, which I think is sometimes another misnomer. People think that, managing people's performance and being direct and being candid is a bad thing. It's absolutely not. It's actually the most humane thing to do. And the other lesson he taught me is, leading someone to know what the outcome is before you have to tell them, right? If you're sitting down and for the first time they're hearing, "Hey, listen, this thing's not working," they should already know that based on how you're having those interactions throughout
Right.
that process. And he modeled that, and he was able to do that and able to influence an organization.
That's great. It's really incredible that you have this one individual who tracks through as you kind of move through your career at these different stages.
Yeah.
Um,
But I'd
so
also share that despite having a role model, Ben, I can tell you I made mistakes trying to implement that, and I know now why I made those mistakes. As when I was a director, I had a team of HR managers, and I tried doing the same thing. I tried empowering, I tried creating a safe space. What I failed to do is I empowered so much that I didn't look into the details. I didn't test for understanding, and a project failed because I wasn't close enough to know when they were falling off the rails. He understood that. I didn't pick up on that nuance. And so it's okay to what I realized in that moment too is it's okay to empower, but you still have to provide oversight. You still have to steer, and sometimes you steer without them knowing you're steering. But,
right.
they still feel empowered to do it, but you're kind of that co-pilot. "Hey, did you look it over there?" That's one of the lessons that I learned early on. It's one thing to empower, it's another thing to empower without any kind of guardrails.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you bring this up at this time because I was thinking about um the disconnect or the connect that can happen or not happen when you're moving from strategy to actual execution. Um, and what I was going to ask you is if you've seen situations or CEOs, presidents, whatever you have, heading the business or making a major operating or strategic shift, whether it's around labor, cost structure, or growth. Where do you see the people side of that breakdown sometimes? You may be in an ELC meeting and we're talking about this is what we want to do. everybody seems aligned on the ELC, and then you look up like 6 weeks, 6 months later, and there was this breakdown. I'm sure you've seen that on the length of your career, but what are some of the things you attribute that to?
Well, I think it starts at the executive level.
Mm,
And the and I mentioned before around, how do you create an environment where people aren't buying, aren't it's not groupthink, right? It's like you're not so homogenized that you don't have a diversity of ideas and perspectives. I think that's the first step. But even then, it's making sure that you don't move so quickly that you haven't given everyone an opportunity to poke holes in it. And it's, alignment of whatever the initiative is to the strategy is the first key, right? Whatever we're doing, is it aligned to the organization strategy and or the purpose, right? The organization's
right.
reason for being. That's the first step, but it may be one of the more important. The next step is there truly alignment amongst the leaders themselves? Right? Is it, is there enough conversation? Is there enough debate to make sure that, okay, we've worked this out. We've someone's been a devil's advocate. They're pushing back appropriately. Because if there's not buy-in there, that's where the breakdown starts to occur. Because as it gets cascaded, we're not managing change. We're not managing the alignment, everything. And then the train truly does come off the tracks. And so it's change management. If I had to encapsulate it in a larger bucket, is that we don't think about the change management implications to what we're doing, and ensuring that there's buy-in from the beginning, and that we create a desire all the way through the organization to want to implement that change. If that desire is not created, people don't understand truly what's in it for them. It's hard then to make sure it's executed properly, and I think that's where it fails.
Yeah, and it ties back to something that you were raising earlier about not, as the middle child wanting to kind of rush to consensus and agreement and having to step back and avoid that in these business situations because that's going to preclude you realizing, is there really alignment? Um, and, you said you cut a lot of things off at the pass if you're willing to have those difficult conversations and push back at the beginning. I had a client. I think so much about effective leadership or what is effective leadership is very situational, depending on what the organizational culture is. And I remember one particular client where if if you were an individual who had come up in an environment where it's important to kind of just listen, you might disagree, but if the person with the highest title in the room is saying something, then you need to figure out a way to get on board. And this was an organization that if you went through meetings and you weren't pushing back and you didn't have views, they just that was a concern. So part of their culture was, and probably how they got to decisions and got to alignment is these spirited arguments where it really didn't matter where you kind of fell in the organizational chart. Um, they're hoping that you're going to come both with critical feedback. So it's
It's
really
great.
interesting.
Yeah.
Um, was there a moment in your career where, let's say, you had a certain way of leading up until that point that was very effective, and you realize this is no longer effective. I need to make a pivot or I need to make an adjustment.
I think it's ah, yeah, I think I'll go back to the example where, I tried allowing a greater autonomy without better specific direction. That I think that again, as I look back and those inflection points, it's the uh, empowerment with validation, empowerment with clarity, empowerment with multiple milestones. Maybe better said, it's that everything's almost a project from a project management standpoint.
Mhm.
So, is it
Correct, you're right.
when there's especially when there's an initiative. I think in general work and ways of and general day to day ways of working, yes, right. That's kind of you release them to be free. But when there's general assignments or large projects, you have to stay closer to it, regardless of the level. If nothing else, just to remove barriers. And that's a great way of approaching it. Like, what is the friction you're facing that I can help you with? That feels a lot better if you're the person that's ultimately accountable to that project. Instead of trying to drive for them, you're simply helping make sure the road in front of them is free of obstacles.
That makes a lot of sense. As you're sitting at the it's fun talking to folks like you who have, um, led and come up in very different organizations, over the course of their career. When I think about Ahold Delhaize, there was multiple companies within a company, um, pre-merger, post-merger, et cetera, and on today to Total Wine. But when you're sitting at the leadership table, what are there things that you're listening for to determine whether a strategy is actually going to be effectively executed with that in that organization at that moment? Are there things that you're listening for to say, okay, I think the organization's ready for this, or this is a great strategy, but we're going to need to do this, this, and this within the organization before we can effectively execute it.
Yeah, what I'm listening for are whether the words being used are aligned to the company's not only the strategy, but its culture.
Mm.
And I'm trying to think how to articulate that. It's if it's something that we want to do simply for the sake of it feels like this is something we can do and it doesn't tie back to again the strategy, the culture, the purpose. It should be at risk. It should be something that's flag like why? Like what was it we're really driving to do? And it not just rationalized to fit, like it's like square peg in a round hole, but it almost immediately feels like, yes, this is very much connected to what we're attempting to do as an organization. That's the first piece, right? Just the narrative, the way it's being introduced. The second goes back to that leadership team. Additional red flags are you know, again, if it's way too quick to be accepted, that's more red flags, like, "Wait a minute, well, you know, is it maybe it's really not gonna be, exponentially impactful if it doesn't cause some kind of debate." And again, maybe not, but it should be another kind of, "Hey, hold on, time out. No concerns? Like, no debate here?" Um and then ultimately, maybe most importantly, is what does it mean for people? Like, is it, you ask yourself the question, is it right for our customer? Is it right for our team member? Those should be two questions that get answered yes for us to do something. If it's no in either case, it's a questionable decision to start with.
Have you been in organizations, and they could be sub-organizations, right? Organizations within organizations, where the culture or in that particular moment, speaking up and saying, "Hey, we need to talk about this a little more," would be more challenging than maybe the client that I, mentioned who you're expected to do that? If you had those moments where it's clear whoever's saying this really wants everybody to say, "Yeah, this is great," but there was a need to sort of put the brakes on it or at least discuss it.
Are you asking other examples where the brakes were put on or where they should have been put on and they weren't?
Well, they could have been put on, but where it required a risk to actually kinda raise your hand or someone to raise their hand and say, "Hey, we need to discuss this more."
Absolutely. There yes, and there have been times in my career where it was more challenging than others, where to raise your hand required significant courage. And, if I'm being candid, there are times where it was too risky to raise my hand, and I didn't say something. Um, and I'm not proud of that, right? And those are moments that haunt you as a professional, especially in situations where by not saying something did impact a team member or team members.
Yeah,
That haunts me. And
yeah.
while it haunts me, it also continues to propel me to want to do more now. It 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 it's I sometimes reflect on some of those situations, and it provides a place for me to find the courage to say something and feel emboldened to say something. Um, and I think that the longer that you are in a position, the more I think the more bold you can get, right? You build up the credibility, you have the capital that I can say something, and if you find fault in that, well, I think I've proven myself the right to be able to be provocative. So, um, yeah, certainly earlier in my career, there were environments that I didn't push as much as I should have. Um, yeah,
I think it's it's funny. Listening to you because we're peers and kind of in the same place in career. And I used to err on the other side, like, "This needs to be said." I mean, and I look back at that now and I'm like, "I could have paused. I could have maybe I could have said it a different way." And if I wasn't in the emotional space to say it a different way at that moment, I could have certainly come back and said it the next day, or maybe I could have said that to the individual when there wasn't a group of people. So I think it's like with all of these things, we almost can't learn them without making mistakes, right?
yeah.
So yeah, I hear you. Is there anything because you've been in obviously today and previously rooms with where you're an advisor to the CEO or to the board. Are there things that you think CEOs and boards have a tendency to maybe underestimate about how a leadership team is going to function under pressure?
Yes, I think there are a few things. When you ask the question, what immediately comes to mind is COVID, right? A few years ago, what a great data point to say, what's it like to see a management team respond under pressure? And you saw organizations, large organizations that heavily pivoted quickly to what was the right thing to do from a safety perspective, even if it was,
Mhm.
maybe a bit extreme. To those that were paralyzed, that weren't ready. And I think that, and again, I'm maybe a selfish plug for training and development. I think it can't be understated the importance of development for leaders. Um, Leadership is more than just performance management. Leadership is more than um, associate relations and dealing in the day to day. Leadership includes crisis management. And I think it's been helpful. I came out of an environment where as in a retail operational setting, you had things like power outages and fires and right, you had to understand how to react in those pressure moments. We prepped for contingencies. Like, what if someone came in and, had a gun to you and said, "Open your safe." What do you do? That was a natural part of that world, and I think organizations will sometimes underestimate the importance of not only training for that, but workshopping it. A
Mhm.
computer-based training on emergency preparation is not gonna get it done, right? You need
Right.
time to workshop things, and that's at the management level. I think at the executive level, the same is true. I think organizations need to spend more time talking about scenarios and what if
Right.
situations. And again, I use COVID as an example, and why I think supermarkets in general did a good job responding is we had done years' work of work on the potential of the avian bird flu impacting the world. Well, it wasn't the avian bird flu; it was COVID. And so we actually took the crisis management manuals and dusted all the dust off and said, okay, most of this applies, and it did. And so
That's
I
it.
think,
I didn't know that.
yeah.
Which years were you doing that work around if the avian flu, reaches this market?
Gosh, I think we were talking about avian flu all the way back, like, to 2012. Yeah, it's in the rear view now, but that was the basis. I mean, I was in 2 different organizations, where avian flu had been back when I worked at Wise Markets, when I was working at Giant,
Mhm.
both had the avian bird flu contingency, um,
That's
and so it was.
that's it. I mean, it makes sense, but, like, let me ask you a question now that you mentioned that. At the time you were getting trained on that or rolling out training on that, were you thinking like, "Well," I don't know if you remember when I was growing up, we used to have duck and cover in case the
Mhm.
nuclear bomb
Yeah,
came. Because apparently, if you get underneath a desk and you just cover right here, you're good if a bomb comes.
absolutely.
So, when you were training for the avian flu, was there any sense of like, "Oh, we're not gonna have to deal with this," or it it seemed possible?
Yeah, I would say that it seemed plausible, but not likely, right? I mean,
Okay.
it wasn't like, "Oh, this is definitely gonna happen," but it could happen, right? And so
Right.
it made sense to talk about it, made sense to plan for it. Um, but I say that I use that as a specific example, and you're
Mhm.
right too. I think that's what organizations need to do is people need to take it seriously.
Right.
And I think in strong, healthy organizations, they do it not just for crisis, but business in itself is also a crisis. They can't underestimate, I'm going to speak specifically to the team member impact, is that world events, changes in the economy, um, whatever's going on from a geopolitical standpoint, impacts the people that matter most to us, right? Cannot underestimate what the smallest changes in the world dynamics means to the organization. We are more insulated, and I think sometimes I lose focus in that. And maybe this is maybe a really bad example to kind of to relate to. We were doing a few years ago. We were doing a volunteer event at a local food bank,
Mhm.
and again, by the way, team building activity. It was meant to be
Right.
fun, and then individuals were coming in to, to collect items, and a department manager from the organization that I was working for at the time came in. I had no idea. A department manager, a position we held in high regard, I thought was well compensated, was struggling. And I realized that I'm insulated. I am disconnected from what that individual is going through, what their family is going through. It was a little bit of a wake-up call to say,
Mhm.
maybe we need to evaluate our certainly our comp and benefit structure, but beyond that, what additional safety nets that exist? Are there rainy day funds that are in existence to help when people are in time of need? You know, how much were we doing to either cause it, or what were we not doing enough to help to support them during those times? And I think organizations need to remember we have an obligation to the people who matter most, which is our line team members, our leaders, that are out throughout all of our geography, to make sure we're doing everything we can to create an environment that's safe and productive for them.
When you in that particular instance, when you sort of came back with not I saw Jane Doe or I saw John Doe, um, but with the insight that you got from that, maybe we need to reevaluate. Was there openness organizationally?
Absolutely. I was
Yeah.
I was fortunate in that situation. I was in an organization with a leader who had immense empathy, um,
Mhm.
you know, equally was shaken by what I had
Mhm.
seen. And it was situational, but
Right.
it burst my bubble, Ben.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not lost on me. It goes back to one of your original questions. How has your early part of your life influenced today? I had
Mhm.
forgotten what it was like, even when I first got a job living paycheck to paycheck, I'd forgotten what that's like,
Right.
and I'm less effective as a leader by not staying connected to what mattered most to me a long
Yeah,
time
I
ago.
I think I'm biased as most of what I do is retail, so, you know, but I think in retail in particular, um it's indispensable because it's just an organiza it's for it to function, you are having people who have radically different life circumstances, um, but are very much integral to the effective operation of that organization, and so to be able to have that wide view and kinda get out of that insulated view of things is actually required for the organization to even operate effectively. I think there's some sectors or industries where they can get away with that because everybody's sort of, generally around the
Yes.
same place, which is not the case, in retail by any means. So, I'm curious, and I think this would probably vary from organization to organization, but when you're looking at leaders on your team, are there certain things and it could be your team in HR or it could be, other functions within the organization. Are there certain qualities that you're looking for that's gonna determine how effective someone will be in the environment that aren't readily gonna show up on paper? I mean, they could have the best background on paper, but these are the qualities that are gonna make them either phenomenal or very unsuccessful
Yeah.
where you're at.
I would say that's another insight that I've learned over the last few years is that it is situational.
Mhm.
You know, it is not lost on me that you can have an individual who is incredibly successful in an organization go to a different organization and struggle.
Mhm.
Just differences between publicly traded companies, PE, privately
Right.
owned, are vastly different. And this is the first. I'm now in the first privately held organization, and it is just completely different. There are amazing strengths and things you can do in a private organization that I could never have done in a publicly traded
Oh, yeah.
company. But there's some differences that took me a while to transition. But what I think is universal is and not lost on me is that there has to be this connection to culture and the organization's heritage. You know, what makes that organization differential and gives it its competitive advantage. And I think there are some universal things I think that are important characteristics in leaders to be successful. I can't underestimate or underplay the importance of empathy.
Mhm.
I can't think of a situation where empathy is not important. I just can't. And I'm not sure I want to work for an organization that wouldn't say that's true.
Right.
But I think qualities like this like organizational dexterity and flexibility, uh,
Mhm.
definitely from a public to a private, that was probably the biggest change for me. In a public, things are pretty much regimented, right? There are systems,
And
there are processes. You're
right.
rewarded for buttoning up and making the process more efficient, right? If you can make the 2 points come closer together and faster, that's success. In an organization that's private, it's how do you navigate complexity? How do you deal with ambiguity? Not the process isn't important. It is, right? Creating processes, creating standardization is still important, the continuous improvement, but innovation almost trumps that, right? Now
Right.
this creative, this innovative spirit, that's almost more important, in the world that I'm in today than some other thing. Again, still important, but more critical here is just a different mindset.
Yeah. I mean, we could have a whole conversation on what it's like to work in a private organization versus a public versus a private that's private equity owned versus that's family owned. Um, it's really, really interesting because there's a lot there, to it.
Yeah. What was interesting
I
is
almost wanna have this. Yeah.
yeah, when I applied for this job, I mean, the team couldn't have been any better. Like they recognized what that transition was. They interviewed for that, right? They
Mhm.
very specific questions like how do you manage through this? How would you deal with that? And it's almost I reflect back on like that was brilliant. I've certainly replicated it in how I interview as well, but it's understanding those nuances. And I would say the same would be true from a public company, someone coming private. Like how do you may not have kind of the autonomy that you had at your previous role, right? That's and the ability to navigate those things is very important.
So, let's say you won the lotto today and your wife said, "Matt said, that's it. I know you love what you do, but you're retiring. We're set. You're retiring." If someone had to step in your role tomorrow, what do you think some of the things they might get wrong, even if they were exceptionally capable, just because they don't yet understand the environment?
Um, I think speed at which things get done.
Mm.
And I'm going to reflect on my own failures. Right, when I first stepped into the role, and that's the kind of the data point that I would use, I knew how things should flow. I knew what an end result to a specific, process or our program should be. The speed at which you do it is nuanced, right? The second thing I would say is that, I'd say in my current role, there's a incredible amount of autonomy, right, to
Mm,
and
okay.
space to play. But when you implement something, the need to allow for a level of co-creation is something that's different. And, what I found for my especially my business partners is I can have something that I know that I'm passionate to roll out and introduce. but I need to leave 1 or 2% unbaked. So, and again, it goes back to that discussion. You need to leave enough flexibility left so people can feel that they have their ability to influence something. That's what I would say is what I've learned here is leave 1 or 2% undone. Let other people help to finish the end product. Which, by the way, if my wife listens to this, she'll understand why when I have a house project, it's always 98 or 99% done. I always leave just a little bit undone. I want her to find it. I want her to, to know that she can, be upset with me for not finishing it.
That's so thoughtful, and there's a method to the madness, right?
Exactly.
So I'm curious, the first part of that was kind of the learning that you had to have was the speed at which things can get done. Was it s was did you need to understand that it was slower or that it was faster?
Both.
Oh, okay.
Both. So there are things that I would move with speed without understanding that's not the pace at which we do certain things. And then conversely, things need to be faster, things less conversation and move to action. And that's what I said. There's every organization has its own nuance, and you have to
Yeah.
understand that the pace. And there's it's not a one or the other. It's situational.
Well, I appreciate you sharing. I'm probably gonna have you back at some point because I think I do wanna have that conversation about um, different organizational cultures, particularly around private versus public. Because I, I have a client that's a private family-owned company that you would know very well, and I mean, they move and they want to execute, but it's different than public companies because they're not operating quarterly. And they want to have that discussion that you're talking about and it not
Mhm.
being fully baked. And it could be 100% the best idea in the world, and there's no way it's not gonna work. But if you come up in an environment where I wanna move to execution tomorrow, you will be frustrated. And I've always suspected that that might have something to do with the private versus public and the really the luxury to be able to see strategy all the way through and kinda test it in ways that you don't have if you're trying to meet some numbers in 2.5 months, right?
That's right. Yeah, generally, by the
So
way, I would say
yeah.
it's faster in private than public, right? The
Really?
general, I would say, yeah,
Yeah.
from what I've experienced, it's faster. Um, but again, it's still nuanced.
Do you think do you think do you think any of that it in part has to do with less fear of making mistakes?
Yes, yeah, the
Okay.
need to not please external stakeholders, for sure.
Mhm.
We can take chances, right? And to some degree, culturally, that is encouraged, right?
Right.
And so I think that's what I'm saying when it comes to business outcomes, different kinds of merchandising philosophies, different things that will move from a business standpoint, it is encouraged to move quickly. But when it comes to how people are impacted, it can sometimes be reversed because we're thoughtful. I mean,
And
legitimately, and I'm proud of this. We're very thoughtful about how the team member will respond and how they'll be impacted. That can sometimes be slower. So it's
right.
contradiction in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Matt, I wanna thank you again. I really appreciate you coming out to chat with me, and I look forward to future conversations.
This was great. I'm honored that you had me on and appreciate the conversation.
Alright, have a great weekend, okay?
Thank you.